It's time to start our first panel for the day, and the panel is titled The Role of Leadership in Empowering Change. I'm not going to introduce the panellists because Andrew's going to do that for us, but I'm going to introduce Andrew, and so I'll step out from in front of him. Andrew Way is the Executive General Manager of Sister and will be running this panel today. So I pass over to Andrew. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And just to also add on the AIPM local chapter lead for the ACT chapter. I'm just honoured to be here today, and we've assembled a wonderful panel of leaders in our industry, and they're here to share their insights into the role of leadership in empowering change. Now, I'm going to be a bit cheeky in terms of we only have an hour, so that really means we've got to maximise the amount of time that these ladies speak to you and minimise the amount of time I talk. So therefore, what happens is that if you could have a look at their bios in the program, I'll introduce each of them in turn. From your left, we have Heather Nicol, who is the General Manager of Workforce Innovation Culture at Defence Trailblazer, and yes, we all want her title. We have Karen Billington, the Infrastructure Lead, Advisory Lead, from AECOM. We have Kendi Hull, who is Deputy President of the United Services Institute of ACT. We then have Jane Cassidy, who is the National President of the Australian Institute of Architects. And we also have, finally, Catherine Loft, who is the Executive Group Manager of Infrastructure, Communications Engagement Division for ACT Health. So we're here to cover a fascinating topic, and we know there isn't enough time in this hour. So what we're going to do is really concentrate on one speaker with one main question response each, and then a couple of the other panellists will add their additional thoughts. We also appreciate there's lunch, not after this session, but the session following that. And of course, these ladies will be here to answer questions at that time. So we once again maximise the amount of time that they can share their insights. So without further ado, I'll go to Heather. And the first question is about how would you define empowerment in the context of your leadership role, and why is it essential for organisational success?
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks to Connie and Darius for having us. This is amazing. Thank you. I will follow Anna Moore's lead and sort of make this informal, share a little bit about myself, just to set a little bit of context. 17-year-old Heather, a few years ago now, flipped a coin. I was either going to be a high school maths teacher. I loved maths, and that was generated in me by a fantastic high school maths teacher I had, or I was going to join the army, to my mother's horror. My sister, by the way, became a butcher. So the flip of the coin landed on joining the army. So I went to the Australian Defence Force Academy, then the Royal Military College, and spent 15 years sort of leading and managing soldiers in the army, and I thoroughly enjoyed every minute of it. If anybody's considering a career change, go for it. Fantastic employer. I stamped my foot when they wouldn't deploy me to East Timor and got out. That was a particular individual whose name shall not be named here, and sort of started on the second phase of my career. I went to a couple of universities in professional staff roles, did a Master of Business, having sort of learned nothing about for-profit entities in either army as a ultimate not-for-profit or universities for that matter, and I've landed in my current role. I'm with the University of New South Wales working on a large project called the Defence Trailblazer. It's about $250 million worth. We've got about 4 years to spend that money. Goodness me, that's actually harder than you might think. And the sort of driver in all of this is improving universities' ability to engage with industry partners. So we're sort of spanning a whole heap of ecosystems, if you like. We've got university stakeholders, quite a lot of them. It's a 2-university venture. We've got a lot of industry stakeholders, more than 100 at the moment, 100 organisations. And it's immense fun. It is my happy place, and it feels like coming home, sort of working in the defence space again. So within that context, I sort of thought about empowerment. I'm not going to define it. You can all look up, Google what the definition technically is. But there's some qualities, I think, that sort of infer that somebody is empowered in their role. I've taken a bit of a look at this as a leader, but obviously I sort of need to think about this in my own context as well. I think understanding the big picture empowers people. If you know where you're all heading, what you're pulling towards, you can do your own job well. Just as a little side note, military have a concept called mission command. It's quite an interesting concept. I'd recommend you have a look at it. It is ensuring that the leaders working for you know the end state they're working towards. They don't need to be told how to get there. If something goes wrong, all they need to do is focus on the end state. It's a really interesting concept and it's incredibly empowering. It's used extremely well across the Australian Army and other militaries and Defence Forces too. Having a voice, obviously, is really important in this concept of empowerment. If you aren't feeling psychologically safe enough to say, I'd like to give you some advice, or can I disagree with you, or in my experience is probably another really important phrase here too. Having a voice is critical, and it is an important leadership trait to be able to make everybody safe enough to say, disagree, or have you thought about this? Trust is the third of four things that I would sort of incorporate into this, what defines empowerment. Being trusted to fulfil your role, to bring your specialist skills to bear, and to deliver what you need to deliver. Across my workforce, innovation and culture activities, I've got a lot of specialists. That's quite a broad sort of remit. A lot of specialists with a lot of specialist skills. I have to trust them to sort of keep working towards that end state, but bring those specialist skills to bear, whether they're spending money, whether they're engaging industry partners, which is obviously really important in the role that we're all doing. Whatever it is, trust is important. And authority, and I mean that sort of both technically, but I guess more generally as well. You need to make sure that your people have the authority to engage with stakeholders, to sort of spend money, as I said. There's a range of things that come together, but empowering them literally and metaphorically with the authority to do their job is really important too. There's a couple of things. I'm going into question 2 here, but I think I've got a little bit of time and I was sad not to get to respond to question 2. The ways I go about doing this, really important to me is being inclusive, not exclusive. A little bit unusual at universities. I'm not sure if everybody in the room, Anna, would agree with me there, but they can tend to be a little bit exclusive. I really work hard to flip that, making sure that everyone can come in the room, everyone can get access to information is critically important, and again, empowers them to fulfil their roles. Being accessible and available. So people can find me, they've got a problem, I'm here, and I'm really happy to help if I can. Being reliable. So if somebody says, I need a bit of help with something, or could you help me sort of deal with this problem, whatever it is, being there and sort of saying, yes, I can, here's the approach I might take, here's some other things you could think about, sort of reliably being there for somebody to come and ask you questions, share thoughts, share concerns, share worries. The final thing, it would be remiss of me not to say communication is obviously really, really critical. Links back to that being inclusive, not exclusive. Sharing is key. Clear communication, and including clear communication of expectations. One of the speakers earlier sort of mentioned accountability. This all sort of builds into this idea of communication. So with that, I might pause there and hand back, Andrew. Thank you.
Well, all I'm going to do is hand over to Jane.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. I think you sort of covered the role of that kind of the top down and the bottom up, and bringing everyone together on the ride. I guess in terms of empowerment, I like to think of also what your role is as a leader. And as a leader, people listen to you. You've got a lot of influence, and I think one of the really important things is that you use that influence wisely.
and make sure that if you're going to sort of tell everyone to kind of, start a war or create an incredible opportunity over there, that really needs to be aligned with where the organisation's going. And so when you're applying your influence as a leader, you've got to make sure that that's actually really core to what your organisational goals are, and make sure that you're not sort of sending your teams over to do a whole lot of work for which they're not well resourced. So really making sure that you're applying your influence at the right time, and making sure that you're inspiring those teams to go and do that work that's going to have the biggest impact for the organisation.
That's fantastic, Jane. Kendi, would you like to share some thoughts?
I think, Heather, you've done an amazing job sort of summarising it, and much like you, I'm not going to try to define or give the definition of empowerment. I think largely it's very individualised as well, and it has to be sort of tailored. It has to be authentic to you, and it has to be tailored to the people you lead. But what I will say is empowerment is a non-negotiable, really, right? So of everything that I observed from, down at platoon level right through to headquarters, brigade, all of that, tech industry or defence, what I observed is where the workforce and the work environment is healthy, there is a presence of empowerment in its own unique, and distinct sort of way. And so I think for me, that's the first thing that you actually need to do. That's the fundamental, structural antecedent to everything else, to innovation, to creativity, to, that is the key thing that as a leader, if you go in to a new team and you don't detect, that sense of, your team being empowered, you got to ask why, and you got to actually make that your number one KPI to actually instill within that team, because everything else kind of flows from there.
That's fantastic and great insights, but we have to keep on moving. So we'll just go to the next question, and Karen will be leading, first off. So Karen, what are some of the practical strategies leaders can use to empower their diverse teams to drive meaningful change?
Thanks, Andrew. I think everything's been said, actually. They're all the themes interweave into each other. So for me, the big part of that question is the word empower. When you're empowered, you have courage and you can do anything. So to answer the question, I'm really going to focus on the word empower rather than the driving change, because you get the empower right and the change just happens. And so I'm going to talk about three things, I think, and this is from what I've seen, what I've felt personally within organisations, but also what I try to create when I'm driving change in teams. And it's three things. So trust, Heather, as you said, autonomy is the second one, and passion. So I think if you get those three things right, 95% of the time, you'll have an empowered workforce. And so for trust, I think, and Anna, you actually mentioned this, it's about getting to know people as people rather than people as objects in an organisation. So they're not just pawns that, turn up every day and, they do their job, but they're actually people. So what makes them tick? What do they do on the weekend? Where are they from geographically? Where are they from culturally? Where do they find their energy? What sucks them of energy? Understanding, people who are different to yourself. I went through a period of time where I had a direct leadership role, and that changed to an indirect leadership role. And it was fundamental, and I did that for a reason. And it was to try and inspire people who were not my direct reports. And I found that fascinating because I actually found myself actually talking to people who I never before, I'd spent time on the floor passing certain people and I'd never reached out and got to know them. And suddenly I needed them to come along with me on a journey, and therefore I had to get to know everything about them. So trust, I think it's also about leading with authenticity. So that's really about, saying what you or doing what you say. I have experienced some leaders in the past who say one thing and blatantly do another, and it has dissolved trust. So lead with authenticity, encourage risk-taking and lean into failure. So, you know, what are the stories that we tell? And we're all project managers here, so we love to celebrate the projects that have gone well, on time, on budget, clients happy, who made a lot of money. What about the projects that don't go so well? And what are the stories that we share about those? Because they're actually the projects where people are doing something different or moving out of their comfort zone. So the second one is autonomy, and I think we touched on that about accountability, but creating space for people to fully lean into their roles. And I think we often clip the wings of people. You know, you're in that box, I'm in this box, that's your job, do your job, as opposed to really understanding their full capability and what they can bring. And I think personally I've had to show my CV to people to get them to understand what my background is. And I think that that's, and, you know, particularly men, you know, would judge me based on the way that I spoke or the way that I dressed or the way that I presented myself. So I think create space for people to really lean into their roles and remove the noise. So what's getting in the way? People should really think about, well, what's the blocker for you reaching your full potential? And how do we as leaders remove the noise on a daily basis? And lastly, it's passion. So understanding the why. Why do people show up? Why do people choose your organisation, choose your team, choose you as a leader? If you can tap into that why, then, you know, productivity increases, the quality increases, and that energy is just, it cascades across the floor. So those three things.
Thanks very much there, Karen. Catherine, would you like to add to that?
Thanks. This amazing panel makes it very difficult to add anything of value, so thank you. I definitely agree with the autonomy, and I think it's really important to give clear expectations but allow that flexibility so people can get out and do their jobs themselves. And I appreciated that you said, you know, mentioned about celebrating success. Sometimes we get so busy in the doing, we really forget to do that, and that's a really important way that we can recognise people. But to recognise people, you did touch on individual motivation. And I think that's really important when we are celebrating success, because that recognition is different for everybody. Some people it's, you know, money. Some people it's a thank you. Some people it's, you know, my dog's name. So it's really important that what you talked about, finding the individual motivation, what makes everybody tick. We put our people first, get to know our people, and then tailor your success stories and your recognition to the individuals. And I also liked your last comment. I thought that really resonated as well, about people choosing us as a leader. It's really important not to get bogged down in the blind spots and understand what makes your leadership successful. What do people look to you for inspiration, and really draw on those strengths and hopefully inspire other people. So thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Catherine. Jane, back to you.
Thank you. I think if you want to inspire change, I think you've got to really recognise what you're trying to change. Probably as an architect, I maybe have a bias to sort of sorting out the technical solution, if you like. And actually culture is king in actually creating change. So is it a technical challenge or is it an adaptive leadership challenge? And I think recognising that is really critical. I think the science of influence is going to tell you that values alignment is going to be far more influential than the science, and we might be seeing that play out in the world today. And so really making sure that everyone along the way can kind of see themselves in that solution is really critical. I think, you know, I think any mother in the room is going to realise what the success of the kind of just do it, just clean your room approach how successful that is going to be. And we know that when you build values alignment with your family or with your team, and you build those solutions together with empathy and understanding each other's perspectives, the result is going to be far more successful. So I think really bringing everyone together on the ride is going to be really critical.
That's a terrific point and a good segue to the next question, which is really about more risk-taking, talking about motherhood. So the role of risk-taking play in empowerment, and how can leaders encourage smart risk-taking amongst their teams? So, Kendi, can you share your insights, please?
Thank you, Andrew. So I love the topic of risk-taking, right? So I'm not exactly the biggest risk taker, so you're not going to see me out there doing adrenaline sports. But in other ways, in terms of how the impact of, risk taking from a positive sort of lens for organisations, I think that's something, that I'm quite passionate about. So I think there are ample studies in psychology, in social sciences, that demonstrates that inextricable link between risk taking and empowerment. But what I would say, though, from sort of the research I've sort of looked at, is that most often there's a precursor to risk-taking, and that usually is empowerment, right? Empowerment is the fundamental, component that then allows people to want to take risks, to feel safe enough to take risks. And I think that's, for me, fundamental in organisations that are complex, highly agile, and so, project management, especially complex project management, is going to require that level and that detail of, thinking and mindset. I'd say, so just back to my career, so a bit of, indulgence here, but I remember when my team was establishing the Australian Defence Force's 5th warfighting domain, right? So at the time, it had been 100 years since the ADF had established a warfighting domain. So the Royal Australian Air Force was the last one, and then here comes, the 5th warfighting domain, which was cyber and information sort of warfare. So such a fundamental shift in thinking, such a requirement to actually sort of take risks, to pioneer this whole new domain, that we had to convince people, we had to have different structures, different command and control, different capability, different policy settings. And we're talking about the ADF, right? So for those who know defence and knows the military, I call them, it's more an institution than an organisation. You are talking about inherently rigid structures, rigid, sort of like ways of command and control, rigid thinking around the establishment of how we conduct warfare. So to then suddenly challenge that and say, there is this domain, it's going to make a crucial difference. It is a game changer, but we're going to shift everything. We're going to shift the way you structure, the way your policy settings, all of that, right? So imagine that. So if I had a team that was not empowered, I would not have been able to actually convince them to think beyond the status quo, because there was far too much noise saying we would just establish this really, really unique domain, but we would make it look exactly the same as Army or Navy or Air Force. It just does not work, right? And so for us, I think, had we not had the appetite for risk, had we not had the appetite to actually think unconventionally, leverage unconventional partnerships with industry, with academia, with the Five Eyes, had we not looked at leveraging untested technology, that's a huge risk. In a department like Defence, where it does not like change, you're asking it to take, really stick its neck out, right? And so had we not done that, I don't believe we would have been able to create and establish that really crucial and fundamental capability for defence and for national security. So I think that's one of my sort of experience and one of my key observation. I think some of the team have asked, in hindsight and looking at other constructs of warfare, what was the fundamental difference? And I'd say I had a team that was empowered to take risk. We failed. God, we failed. And we have so many battle scars. And we drank quite a lot. Too much sometimes. But as soon as, we failed, we were bold enough to look at what it was that we did wrong, right? And it's just such a human instinct to want to move beyond that. So failure is just so uncomfortable. We don't like talking about it. We definitely don't want to examine it too much. And so it doesn't occur as often as it probably should. But for the team, what we did do is every single time we failed and it didn't work, whether it's small or large, we really examined it and we're like, what did we do? You know, we war gamed it, you know, we billboarded a bit, and we got to the point where it was a good idea. We just need to pivot slightly, right? And so I think we were able to actually chase that dream. The other thing is, an experience we had, and I think Heather, you were sort of, kind of involved in this when we developed the Potentium platform, which is a platform that was looking at how we're going to war game and run experimentation for cyber and information warfare, right? So we're not talking kinetic here, so we're not talking, hey, we shift this, let's move this tank this way and then, we see an effect. It was, rather intangible at times. And so that fundamentally required a team that was willing to actually sort of say, hey, the way that we run traditional war games just is not fit for purpose. So can you imagine some of these really young men and women, and going and sort of saying to the 2-star, the 3-star, the way you're running war game won't work. And they had to be empowered to say that. And they had to, not just by myself, but the extended defence sort of team. And I think that's what we got right. And that's the thing, that's the type of magic that you want to perpetuate, definitely sort of in your team. So I think that's my sort of thoughts around sort of, risk-taking. I'll leave it at that.
Amazing insights, and certainly touches upon a bit of my career as well when you're talking about defence and implementing change. So, always a challenge. And really I like that point there about, really being able to empower people to take the risks. I think that's a really great one. Karen, would you like to share your thoughts as well?
So when you were talking about risk taking and having a culture who was empowered, the question is, what if you don't have a team who feels empowered to take risks? Like, how do you move that? And I think I joined a team who was exceptionally conservative, very hierarchical, I guess stay in your swim lanes. This is what you do. Ask for, direction from those above you. And we actively moved the culture. So we looked at lots of different workplace cultures, and there's a lot of good cultures out there. They're just different. But we really wanted to move from a conservative, risk-averse culture to a risk-taking culture. And it was very much about what do we need to give up and retire? What stories do we need to not tell people and leave behind so that we can actually move into a new paradigm? And what do we need to adapt? And, how do we move our people into this space? And over, I'd say, about 2 years, we moved significantly into this new space. And people were doing lots of new things, reaching out for new roles, new ideas. We took on new projects we'd never done before. And for me, it's a bit of a learning that we can change culture very much so, and we can take more risks into a future. So even if you are in teams who potentially might not have a risk appetite at the moment, it doesn't mean that, they can't move into that space if there's an agreement to do so. And I think that's what's really powerful, that cultures can change really quickly when you work at it. And as long as you kind of move everyone into the same direction and have the goal known, you can kind of move into that risk-taking culture.
That's fantastic, Karen. Catherine?
I really like that. I think for me, it's about asking key questions or just asking questions in general. So to be able to create that safe space, we want to take risks. Sometimes, our hands are tied with budget and timeframes, but we have pressure from government or public or whoever we're working for to really push. So we need people to be safe to do that. So one of, what I really like is just ask the question back. How would we? How could we? And it's amazing then the ideas that can come forward, and then you can really harness that energy and start encouraging people that might be a little bit more conservative to take the risks, just by having those initial conversations. Ask lots of questions is what I'd say. Thanks.
It's such a great skill to ask a good question, right? I think that's my career yet again. Thanks. We'll move on to the next question, and Jane will lead this discussion. And it's really trying to explore how leaders can foster an environment of innovation, creativity, especially in organisations that may be resistant to change? I'm not going to mention defence, right?
Thank you. I think I've probably got 6 things, so bear with me. Look, leadership is a service. And so as an architect and a consultant, I think if you kind of approach it with a CX lens or a client experience lens and you approach all of those stakeholders in your organisation like you're serving your client, I think that can be a really helpful approach. So really listening and deep engagement and being, inquiring to kind of understand those stakeholders and what their values are is really critical. I think embracing adaptive leadership and I think in that, know thyself. So as an architect, as I said, I work with a lot of engineers, and we have a bit of a technical bias, let's say. So really, and we like to lean into that ahead of the cultural challenge, right? So really knowing who you are and what your biases are, so that you can work to mitigate those, I think is important. And recognise the difference between the technical challenge and the cultural challenge. So technical challenges, they might have sort of fairly straightforward methodologies and clear solutions. Or sometimes they have really complex methodologies and complex solutions. But adaptive challenges mean that you've got to understand your culture, values, beliefs, roles, and relationships, and really emphasise listening, innovation, creativity, and collective problem solving. And probably, those last 5 are something that architects do pretty well when we're serving our clients. And so if you sort of link that back, I think it's important. I think really aligning your organisational goals using both top-down and bottom-up is really crucial in doing that. And using co-design with those stakeholders so that you get that values alignment to the organisation is really important. I think I'm a teacher too, so the strategies of pedagogy are pretty important here too. So really encourage that culture where you've got continuous learning within the organisation. And as a teacher who worked with a whole lot of kids at university who didn't have a university entry score, and helping them understand their own challenges. Helping them with their own confidence, celebrating success with them on the way, and helping them unpack the way they worked and how they could work better, using probably some project management strategies there as well, which really led to the success of those students actually topping their university and going well past what the other really high ATAR students had achieved. So I think, really using diverse skill sets is critical, and encouraging lifelong education. Encouraging multidisciplinary approaches, and I think that's really critical, and I think Anna talked really well about that this morning. I think, collaborating across diverse teams is really critical, and breaking down those silos that really hinder your progress. And so just a great example of that is over the last few years, we've been developing the architecture industry decarbonisation plan with the goal of creating an orderly transition to net zero. And really that's the whole plan is about creating prosperity for industry, our stakeholders, the supply chain, but as well as saving the planet. So some kind of big, hairy, audacious goals there. And what we realised was we couldn't do that alone, or alone it would be far more challenging. So working with the Green Building Council of Australia, the Australian Sustainable Built Environment Council, the Property Council, the Master Builders, all of us working together actually were able to influence the building ministers in every state of Australia to get on that pathway, and in the 2025 National Construction Code, we'll have the first step towards that in terms of embodied carbon measurement being consistently applied across Australia. So really big impact when you collaborate. Leveraging, I think you can't forget kind of leveraging the technical expertise in the room. So whilst that adaptive and cultural piece is critical, you've got to have the right technical expertise in the room. You've got to define the problem really well that those technical experts are going to be solving, and that's going to really help foster a really innovative environment. And look, I don't know about you, but as an architect, I like to set some big, hairy, audacious goals. And I think Anna, again, helped us think about how really big they could be this morning. And so like any great design problem, is that still working? Like any great design problem, I like to set those project aspirations really collaboratively with stakeholders, programming those into really manageable chunks over time, and bring the stakeholders on the journey using an agile approach, which is going to get you much faster and quicker towards that big, hairy, audacious goal. And probably lastly is psychological safety. I think absolutely critical in any environment where you want to really get innovation to work properly. I think courageous teams are built on great culture. And at GHD, in my day job, I'm the Asia Pacific service line leader for architecture and design. And one of the things we do across our design community is we have our global technical design review group. And what we do is we bring globally diverse teams in as a challenge team to the project team. And we take an intergenerational approach to that, so young people, older people, and we use it to help step up all of our teams in understanding how to do critique well, how to innovate, how to bring technical leadership, and how to create the best solutions for our clients, bringing all of that thinking together in a really productive way. And so I think that's a really critical thing. So using innovation, technical leadership, creativity, a really nurturing and safe environment so that you can really embrace dissent and understand where its value is to really optimise the value for your business. And just on that psychological safety, I think probably the Institute of Architects, we've defined culture, and evolving our culture is probably our number one challenge over the next few years. And I think, when you've got a poor culture, it really entrenches outdated ways of working. And if you can get that organisational structure right, you can get the technical systems right, and you can get your culture right, you can really capitalise and create those innovation opportunities to really amplify your impact. And I think for me, our key purpose at the Institute of Architects is to advance architecture together, and we can only do that when we've got all of those things in place.
Wow. It will be remiss of me not to go to Heather to give a little bit more of insight from her perspective as well.
Thanks again, Andrew. I'm quite impressed with the concept of an orderly transition to save the planet, Jane. That was brilliant. Without any collusion or cartel behaviour, I also wrote down audacious goals. This is to sort of inspire innovation, creativity in teams. I've seen it. We've done it. It is absolutely amazing when you can lift teams up, and it might be you as a leader, it might be the admin person supporting your project, whoever it is, to sort of elevate thinking beyond this is what we always do. The buzz that comes from that and the impact that you can achieve is amazing. So setting audacious goals would be recommendation number one from me. I would come back to trust as well. So if you're doing something different, you have to trust your team, particularly the specialists within teams, to contribute constructively, to make change, to be different, to do something audacious. And once again, the sort of payoff for doing that is the incredible buzz that you can sort of generate amongst a team of individuals, bring them together and deliver amazing impact. Karen, I think, said earlier that time and space to lead is really important in this context too. I don't think, if you're sort of ticking boxes and complying with rules, that is the absolute opposite of innovation and creativity. It's important, sure, but there needs to be the time and space to sort of lead in this context, all with the aim of delivering outcomes, generating goals, engaging stakeholders. The final thing that I would say to sort of supplement or implement innovation and creativity in your teams is enabling everyone in your team, including yourself potentially, to take full advantage of the education and development offerings all our organisations at least claim to provide. But as a university, we've got some amazing PD and education offerings. I'm slightly horrified at how few times we take them up. We really should be saying to our teams, go and do a project management course, go and do whatever it is that will sort of get you towards your next job. And I'd encourage everybody in this room to take full advantage of those opportunities too. They're there, they're great, and they will help you now and in future.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Helen. Kendi, would you like to add?
Yeah, gosh, organisations that are resistant to change, I've been in some of them. This mind and body bears scars. So I think it's just amazing summary, sort of, by sort of Jane, definitely. I'll add probably 3 sort of more that I sort of think would really help us push past, some of the resistance that you might sort of meet, right? So I'd say the number 1, learn to love your disruptors. Gosh, we say we need them, but when they appear, they manifest, they're argumentative, they don't conform. And, it's so easy to sort of say, yeah, that's great, but, over to that side for now, right? We're not ready for your disruptive thinking. We're not ready for your unconventional, sort of like approach. So learn to love them. And if you can't love them, at least learn to listen to them, right? Because usually what they're doing is they're pushing you out of that echo chamber. And it's really, really important, especially when we're talking about like, modern, or blue sky sort of like science or, capability. They are the ones that I'd always pull into the room. They may look different, they may sound different, they may have completely different sort of, and they may at times sound crazy, but you need them in the room. The second one I think is don't die in a ditch over everything. In all honesty, like I've sort of sat in meetings and people are it starts to become, let's move past blah because there's just always something that, is wrong. There's always, and so learn to understand, I think, and learn to grasp what is, sometimes the juice is just not worth the squeeze on certain topics. And so differentiate for yourself what is a fundamental, non-negotiable versus I can live with that. I honestly can live with that. Right? And you're going to find more of the I can live with that versus the actually this is just a non-negotiable, right? And so, but if the equation is slightly, flipped, you've got to wonder if you have to change your mindset somewhat. Because remember, you need to wonder whether or not you're part of the resistance. And I think lastly, learn to make the compelling argument with data-driven sort of, argument. That is not to say that make everything about the numbers, right? So the numbers are there to reinforce that story and that compellingness, that you're putting forth. Don't fall in love with the numbers so much that you forget what your fundamental arguments are. But I actually find that having a data-driven, data-led, sort of argument can be quite persuasive, can be really, compelling. And I think those are probably the 3 additional sort of elements I'd say when you're tackling, just fierce resistance. Which I'm sure we all do. So, thank you.
Thanks very much, Kendi. Just moving on to our final question of today, and it's obviously with Catherine to lead this discussion, and it's a bit of a double-barreled question, so I'll just try and compress that. But how important is it for leaders to model empowered behaviours themselves, and what are some of the ways that they can do that? And I think what we talked about is also, potentially for the panel to talk about some of the barriers that prevent leaders from empowering their team members effectively. So over to you, Catherine.
Thanks, Andrew. Triple-barreled, I'd say. We've talked a lot about what I'm going to talk about already, but I think to bring it back to that question, the why is it important that we are role modelling these behaviours, is as leaders we set the tone, end of story. People look at us as role models. So as Kendi said, it's just absolutely non-negotiable that we demonstrate empowered behaviours. So one of my mottos is people follow actions, not words. And I can apply that, and I think we all can, to our personal life as well as our professional life. You know, it's what people do, not what they say. So be really, aware that people are watching us. I'm a really strong believer, I think we all are, in do what you say. Really important to follow through. Acting with integrity will bring credibility to our leadership. That we've talked a lot about trust and engagement. But by trusting our teams, encouraging ownership, and yes, sometimes that can be scary, which is one of the barriers that I'll get to, but that then fosters a culture where individuals can feel safe to take the initiative and contribute their ideas and challenge the status quo, as Kendi was talking about. But we need that safe environment for people to grow. I work in a traditionally hierarchical field, in project management, particularly in infrastructure. So we need to be really visible with our empowerment, and then that is signalling that we really value the different perspectives people bring, and then that brings the innovation and the learning. One of the really important reasons why is to balance accountability with trust. So again, government infrastructure projects, we've got a lot of really strict compliance that we need to balance with, but we need to trust the teams to make the decisions. So leaders who can demonstrate balancing this will get the initiative back. How do we do that? For me, I'm a big believer in showing vulnerability, having a growth mindset. So to do that, admit when you're wrong, admit when you don't know. Just because we're leaders, we don't have all the answers. We don't have to set the solutions. We ask the questions. It's really easy to fall into offer a quick fix, get things done quickly, but that's not our jobs. Our jobs are to bring everybody together and get diverse perspectives and get a better solution than the one that we might think is right or the quickest way. We need to really make normal that continuous learning, and we do that by sharing our experiences, seeking feedback. I don't have the answer. What do you think? It's amazing, when people are asked what they'll tell you. Share your personal challenges with your staff and, the lessons learned from the failures. People, I think, need to feel connected to us, and that they're not that different from us. And how did we get here, and what was our journey? And hearing, the speakers this morning about their journeys, it makes you reflect on, what did I do and what do other people do? And we're all human. So, fundamentally we need to relate to each other first. So being vulnerable, having boundaries, but being vulnerable with a growth mindset. Delegating responsibilities, but making sure there's meaning behind them, for me, is really important. So no micromanaging. I think that's, pretty 101. Keep coming back to asking questions to help solve the problems, not just offering the quick fix yourself. People know I like to talk on this subject. And we've talked about publicly recognising the contribution, so just give credit where credit's due. We want to really encourage constructive, challenge and open communication. We've talked about creating that culture of speak up. That's a strength. It's not insubordination. We really need to encourage speak up and celebrating different approaches. Get rid of but that's the way we always did it. We've heard Kendi talk about that as well. And really important in the decision-making process, not just the what, but the why. So then we can be in alignment with those two things when we're talking about decisions. We've talked about transparency, inclusive decision-making, coming back to clear communication and just being honest. But there's lots of barriers to being able to do all these things. And, we are human, we make mistakes, and we've all got preferences. Some of those barriers, there's, potentially a fear of losing control. As a leader, it's very easy to want to control everything and control the outcome because it could be your credibility or reputation on the line or your team. So that you really have to shift your mindset from controlling to more of an influence-based leadership. So we're here just to influence and get the best out of everybody else. We need to be able to recognise that empowering strengths doesn't diminish our own leadership. And I think that's a really important reminder as well. There's potentially a perceived lack of time that, by the time I delegate, by the time I train you up, by the time I teach you how to do it, I could have done it all myself and probably would have been better and cheaper and quicker. That's really short-sighted. So initially it does take the time, and I've got some wonderful leaders here today and they'll hear me bang on all the time about carve out the space for your people. Your job is about people. Set the time, think strategically, develop your people because it's going to pay off in the long run. So while it's, really easy to think, I need a quick solution, invest in your people, slow down, take the time, let them come up with it. So mentor rather than just, being directive. Micromanagement and a lack of trust is another barrier. As I said, that could be, fear of costs or delays. We can do things quicker ourselves. One of the ways around that is to implement really structured decision-making frameworks. That's a real key initiative that I always look at first of all. So the team know when they can act and how they can act, a framework to be able to do that in, and then wrap that up with some good governance around it. And that empowers the people to know the boundaries that they can operate in and then have the discussions around that where they can add some more value and innovation as well. I think you talked about, Jane, resistance to change and fear of failure and that psychological safety. Just start small. Sometimes this can be really overwhelming for new leaders, all these things that I've got to do and, put everybody else first and not just jump to the solution. Often people get there because of their technical experience that they were able to deliver quickly on time, on budget. But remember, that now a leadership role is completely different. So just start small and, what little thing can you inject into a project and then start scaling up instead of, thinking I've got to do all of this stuff. And again, you talked about, Jane, the unconscious bias. For me, it's about being really aware of your own preferences and then pushing the boundaries and pushing yourself out of the comfort zone, particularly when we're busy and stressed, and everybody's getting asked to do more with less, and we default to certain behaviours that we're comfortable in. Be really aware. I really try to look at blind spots, feedback, have a critical friend or do it to myself. And the more you're conscious of it, you'll hear yourself in your thought process and you'll pick up something. It's okay to apologise straight away. So my direct reports, we've got a safe word that, when I get straight into the doing instead of the leading, I'll say my safe word or one of my team will say my safe word, and it's a really good reminder to go, oh, stop. I'm busy. I've defaulted back into quickly get it done, Catherine. So stop all that. So whatever strategies that you can come up with, it's okay to share that with your team and ask for help and support. And I think that all of those will help overcome the barriers.
Some fascinating strategies there and, some really great tips. So, Karen, can you just add to that?
I think between everyone here today, there's so many points, and for fear of kind of going back over them, I think there is one thing really when you think of a leader and modelling empowered behaviours. My reflection is they did that. So wow, someone did something. They had a goal, they had a vision, they moved from A to B, rather than potentially they sat in a seat and babysat the role for a while. So for me, it's, whether it's a big audacious goal and they did something huge and strategic and pivotal for the organisation, or whether it's something simple like you fought for that person, that employee beneath you who, was really struggling with their time management, and, you removed 3 meetings in their week because they weren't adding value. But I think people need to see that you are able to stand up and fight for something, that you have a voice, that you will go in to battle, essentially, to fight for your something that you believe in. And I think that's really fundamental. When you think about, the great leaders, either in your organisations or outside of them in different industries, it's someone who's done something, big or small. I think it's really important for leaders to role model empowered behaviours. Yeah.
That's great. Heather?
I will start with a confession. I'm not necessarily the best at this. I miss the days. So I transitioned from army to university, large hierarchical organisations, but very different in many ways. I miss the days of just being able to tell someone what to do without saying please. You've obviously got to say please in universities. You've got to cajole and convince. So I'm not always the best at this. I also find, to be completely honest, that I need to be way more politic and polite than number one is natural, but number two, I actually don't want my team to sort of filter themselves like I have to do in my role now. So there's sort of, I guess, with that confession that I'm not always the best model of these behaviours. I would answer the question with decisiveness. I try and sort of model, make a clear decision, communicate it well, explain the concept and, again, that end goal so that others do the same. You make clear decisions, your team sort of communicate effectively across your stakeholder ecosystem. That's one thing I try and do. I try and model provision of advice to my bosses at times, respectful, polite, professional advice if I've got thoughts or feelings, and would hope that my teams would do that too with me. And respect I would call out individually as well. That is something that I will always try and model. Again, I don't always do it as well as I need to, I confess, but it's so important. I think with if you're playing the ball, not the man, to use a terrible phrase for Women's Day, you can overcome issues. You can get to solutions even with contention or arguments or disagreements. So respect of other humans as individuals, I think, is a really important thing that I personally try and model all the time, despite all my other shortcomings.
I'm sure you don't have that many shortcomings, so we can compare my list. Look, one of the things, we're just running out of time a little bit, so I'm going to put the panellists on the spot, and really I think this will work best if you just pass the mic. So I'm just going to challenge each of you. You've only got 2 to 3 key words to say from this discussion that you want the key messages for the audience and yourselves. So because you have the microphone, Heather, if you could start, and only 2-3 words.
I would come back to trust. I would come back to...
What?
Wait. These are just thinking out loud. I think time and space to lead is really important, and I just want to randomly add maybe something like donuts, or there's a social aspect to this too that I think is really important. Thanks, Andrew.
I like the donuts. Trust, authenticity, autonomy, and passion.
Are we still on the food theme? Okay. Wine, if it's going to be. But I think words and deeds must match. They must match, right? And more than that, it's not just doing what you say. It's also for your team to actually see that you're paying attention to the stuff that you're saying is important, right? Because most often they'll say, oh, yeah, innovation is great, or, empowerment, but the truth is they then don't actually pay that much attention to it. So, sorry, that was so many more than...
It's a tax.
So balance the technical systems with culture, absolutely. Make the spaces psychologically safe. And I think probably for me, what got us here will not get us there. And so for probably most of us today, what got us to the places we are in will not get us where we're going individually or with our orgs or the planet. So learn and listen on the way.
Fantastic. And Catherine?
Don't forget to make it fun.
That's great. Love those philosophies. Look, I think as an infamous predecessor kind of goes boom or something like that, in esteemed company, that was actually a fantastic panel session. It was really, really depth, insightful. There's lots of great practical strategies that everyone can take away. I really like Heather's point about empowering, needing a big picture understanding, that having voice, being trusted to deliver with authority. Karen made an excellent point of needing to tap into passion and to connect in with the why. And that why question is so powerful. Kendi added that the concept of empowerment, trust and psychological safety are paramount to risk-taking, and perhaps maybe wine, I think, is the other bit of that that I remember. Jane described leadership as a service, and I think that there's that need to set audacious goals in the practice of leadership. And there's a really good little phrase that you said there, Jane, which is about embracing dissent. And I think that was really a really personal great takeaway from myself. And Catherine really rounded out by making a point that resonated with me about the need to showcase vulnerability and possess a growth mindset. So a mighty thank you to this esteemed panels, for their time today and sharing their insights. So can you please show your appreciation? Thank you.